Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 3, Episode 4, What I Am. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So we'll start as always with the patients. One of our patients is a woman who has a birth plan, and despite distress to her child, is so committed to the birth plan that she almost loses both her life and the baby's life, resisting having a C-section. However, ultimately a C-section is performed, which does end up saving both her and the baby. Then we have a patient who promises to give up smoking when he returns home and so decides to have one last cigarette while he's in the hospital. However, he is connected to oxygen at the time. So when he goes to light the cigarette, he unfortunately ends up lighting his face on fire. And he is a salesperson, so this, of course, is a detrimental incident for him. However, Mark Sloan, who has now been officially hired at the hospital, is there and is able to treat the burns, though does warn that his face will never be exactly what it once was and he will have scarring. And those are the two patients other than Meredith herself, who is the third patient, and she ends up with appendicitis after a brief pregnancy scare. They realize that it's not pregnancy symptoms, appendicitis symptoms. George gets a bit of a redemption in that the first surgery he failed was an appendectomy, and now he scrubs in on Meredith, successfully performing the procedure that he had failed before on her. She spends a lot of the episode on pain medication because of the appendicitis, and that leads to some funny instances when she interacts with Christina, with Derek, Finn, George, leading us into the she has a bit of a heart-to-heart with Addison. Addison then goes to Derek and tells him not to hurt her again, like Meredith again. So Derek then, after realizing how great a guy Finn is, decides to bow out of their little dating competition, basically taking the choice out of Meredith's hands. And because she's so devastated by the loss of Derek, she realizes Derek was the one she would have picked. So then after her surgery, she then breaks up with Finn, ending up with neither of them in the end of the episode. Callie obviously was kicked out of the house in the last episode. Now she and George start to make up, and he promises to go to dinner with her at the hotel she's staying at. But unfortunately, he then ends up backing out of that date, and so she then tells him that they're done, goes to the bar, meets Mark at the bar, who's been officially coworker filed by Addison, so filed into the coworker section. They are not going to be in a romantic relationship, and he meets Callie at the bar. We then have Izzy's little side story of the episode in that she goes to the bar to meet Denny's father, Denny Sr., who at first is kind of accusatory because, random woman that his son tells him they're going to marry, and then he dies, she quits her job. He thinks the worst. She clarifies things. They have a bit of a heart-to-heart. In the end, he ends up giving her an envelope and then a number to an answering machine and the code to check the message. And she then has George come with her and sit with her while she listens to Denny's message, which is him telling his parents all about how much he loves Izzy and that he's going to marry her, got a new heart, apologizing for leaving with just a note and not contacting them so that they wouldn't have to watch him die. And as she's listening to the message, George opens the envelope and there is a check for a lot of money. I believe it's 8 million and something, over 8 million. So that's kind of where this episode wraps up. Well, not kind of, it is where the episode wraps up. One more thing, though, that I just forgot and remembered. Burke, of course, has been practicing suturing. He has a tremor. He goes in to get certified to go back to surgery. He tries to tell Derek, but Christina comes in saying he's fine, he's fine. Christina then later finds out he wasn't fine, he had a tremor, and they both decide, instead of telling Derek, instead of coming clean, instead of communicating as they should, that Christina is going to scrub in on his surgeries and basically cover for the tremor so that he can still do surgeries, and she obviously gets to benefit by going into more surgeries. So that happens too. Anyways, now that we are finally done with the summary, it is now time to rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking. And on our mostly objective rankings, we first, of course, have our 3 supporting characters for this episode, and they're worth 1 point each, and that's Denny Duquette Sr., Sean Sullivan, who lit his face on fire, and then Rebecca Bloom, who was willing to kill herself and her baby to avoid a C-section. Luckily, that does not end up happening. We then have +4 for Mark being hired in the hospital, which is a multi-season main character development. And then the second development is Izzy getting to listen to the message left by Denny, which she receives from Denny Sr. along with inheritance, as she was named in Denny's will, because he wanted to marry her and he loved her so much, for a very, very large check. So that's 8, 9, 10, 11 positive points. But there was also quite a few negatives in this episode as well. First, we of course have the negative messaging or behavior, which is that Burke fails to communicate to Derek that his injury is not fully healed. Derek tests like his range of motion, which is all healed up, and the other aspects of the injury, but obviously has not yet seen the tremor, so he's not aware of that. And instead of communicating to Derek that he has a tremor, Burke decides to hesitate, and then in his hesitation, Christina then speaks on his behalf, but he doesn't stop her or correct her. However, later, she then figures out that she was wrong, speak on his behalf, that he does have this tremor, which she hadn't known about either. And instead of them both going and coming clean to Derek and saying, we didn't know about this before, I didn't have an opportunity to say, but you can't clear me for surgery, I have this tremor, can we look into it? They decide they're going to sneaky cover it up while Burke does surgeries and Christina's going to help him with his surgeries, which could have consequences for the patients who aren't aware that a surgeon who has a tremor is operating on their heart. I said it from episode 1 that from the patient perspective, this show is horrible. This show is absolutely terrifying because the choices that these doctors make very rarely are to the benefit of the patients. And this is another example of that, in that, instead of doing what's right by the patients and future patients and, looking into the tremor, seeing if it can be fixed, seeing what might happen with it, Christina and Burke decide to team up and cover it up, which again could cause harm to patients down the line if they make even a single mistake, and they are fully aware of the fact that they are going into surgeries not at 100%, putting these risks on the patients, but the patients will not be aware that that's what they're doing, which I think is very, very negative, so -2 points there. There's also -2 points for the supporting relationship regression or breakups. And this is that Callie has enough of George, stops giving him chances, but they were already kind of broken up before this. So I didn't take points for it, but I did want to mention it because I think that their breakup really was in the last episode, and it was an almost second chance, which ends up failing. So I wanted to note it as a relationship regression, like the official breakup, but I'm not taking points for it because I do think they were officially broken up really in the last episode. And this was just kind of like the death throes. And then the one that I did take points for was Meredith officially breaks up with Finn, having chosen Derek. And then we have -3 for, regrettably, Derek bowing out of the relationship, so this is a main relationship regression or breakup, because he doesn't want to hurt Meredith again, so he hurts her by breaking up with her before she had a chance to make a choice and decide if Derek was the one for her. And unfortunately, it does end up that when he breaks up with her, it is you don't know what you have until it's gone sort of thing, where she realizes in him breaking up with her that he was the one that she wanted all along. That's why she breaks up with Finn. Um, However, all told, once all the points have been considered, this does become a 4 out of 10 episode. You know what, actually, I'm going to take the points for Callie officially breaking up with George. I do think their breakup was when he kicked her out of the house, but because they did have that little blip of her giving him a second chance and then him standing her up, I've changed my mind. I do think that is worth -2 points. So in fact, actually, it is a 2 out of 10 episode for this episode. Which brings our mostly objective ranking list for season 3 so far to: in first, I Am a Tree; second, Time Has Come Today; What I Am this episode falls in third; and then Sometimes a Fantasy is fourth. Now, with regards to my personal ranking for this episode, there were aspects of the episode I liked, aspects of the episode I didn't like, but ultimately I did find that it was an entertaining episode. I enjoyed the comedy of Meredith being a little bit high on the pain medications due to her illness. Also, how it's almost as soon as like Mark walks in, Addison reacts to him, oh my gosh, he's there, and Derek reacts, and then all of a sudden Meredith is puking, and everyone's like, pregnancy, adulterous love child, and I love the timing of it all. Then, of course, she was high on the medications. I do like that the triangle is completing and that they didn't drag that out too many episodes. I do feel really bad for Finn because honestly, he probably was the better guy, but also now Meredith is left with nothing, which is a little bit sad. In order to introduce Mark, who is in the plastic surgery field, they then had the poor Mr. Sullivan light his face on fire, which was an interesting concept and a good warning. Like, do not have open flames around pure oxygen. Very bad idea. But it is sad that he had to go through a burned face in order to introduce Mark as a character. That was sad. Obviously, George always picking Meredith and Izzy over Callie. I feel like George went into the relationship half-hearted and he's coming out of the relationship half-hearted. And I feel bad for Callie because she's a good character and a likable character, more so than George. And she's kind of been led around and messed around with, and that's not something that I personally enjoy. So I am glad that their relationship ended, but I do feel that that relationship never needed to be either, though I guess that relationship does allow George to get over the incident with Meredith, so that does end up being a positive for it, but I just wasn't one of my favorites. The Izzy and Denny thing is still being dragged on, and I understand she's grieving. And I do feel like she was willing to marry him. She really loved him. So I understand her grieving. And this curveball that he was really wealthy and now she has an inheritance, but she cares more about the message than the money, I think is nice to show that they were real feelings between each other and that she may not even have known that he was that wealthy. But again, similar when Denny died, I feel like all of the decisions that they made with regards to this Izzy and Denny situation soured me to the relationship to the point where I don't necessarily care that much. Nor do I think that as somebody who is partially responsible for Denny's death that Izzy deserves like millions of dollars. But ultimately that was Denny's decision to make, so can't really say anything on that. And like I said, like I liked the episode. I didn't really find Oh, the other thing I didn't like is obviously if you are somebody and you want to have a natural birth and you have a birth plan, I can understand that. I can understand being excited about it. But if you then hear that your child is in distress, that you are not able to have a natural birth, that you could potentially harm both you and the child by continuing to insist on a natural birth, I find it kind of disgusting because as a mother, you should be caring more about your baby's life than whether or not your plan comes to fulfillment, or whether you miss out on an experience you wanted to have. It's like your baby is more important. Their life is more important. Maybe we consider the baby and his life, or even your own life. Like, I understand sticking to a plan. I am a very plan-oriented person. I make plans all the time, and I do like to stick to them. However, you gotta know when to bend, and you've gotta know when to edit your plans so that they don't harm people or yourself. You have to act in your best interest, and as a mother, you also have to act in your child's best interest. And so I did not like that aspect of the story. Not not at all, really. And even Addison, because she was going through her own emotional turmoil with Derek and Mark and Meredith, she let it go a little bit far, and it was actually Karev who had to come to her and basically say, like, are you planning to kill the mother and baby? And in the end, Addison had to put her foot down and basically say it's not a conversation anymore. It's lives on the line now. We're doing the C-section, and luckily they were both saved. But without Alex, it could very well have ended differently, and that also didn't set well with me either because obviously Addison's supposed to be the best in her field, and yet she almost lost a mother and baby because she couldn't put her foot down and say, like, your plan has to change because she was too involved in her personal issues, which in her personal life is fine, but when you are at work, you should be focusing on your job. Anyways, with all of that laid out, I decided to give this episode a 7 because there were negatives, but I do think ultimately it was more entertaining than boring. So, with that being the case, my personal ranking so far is I Am a Tree. In second is this episode, What I Am. Then Sometimes a Fantasy and Time Has Come Again is currently last. And that brings us now to our series ranking so far, which we have season 1 in first place on our mostly objective ranking with 77.78%. Season 2 at second place with 76.67%, and season 3 so far has a total of 16 out of a possible 230. Then on the personal ranking side, we have season 2 in first place with a score of 72.22%, season 1 with 66.67%, and then season 3 so far has 26 out of a possible 230. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy season 3 episode 4, What I Am. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.